We are the Development Engagement Lab. I'm Molly Anders, the Research Impact Communications and Engagement Lead, and this is Paolo Marini, who is our Senior Research Fellow. DEL is a research organization looking at public attitudes and engagement with international development. We work in Great Britain, France, Germany, and the United States. We are a grantee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and you might remember our work from the Aid Attitudes Tracker. Oh, I have the control, don't I? I have the power. So you don't know yet very much about DEL, but once you do, hopefully you'll want to engage with us. So we have a few ways of doing that. Development Compass is our website, and that's where you'll find all of our data and all of our reports. Everything is free to use, I should say. It's part of our grant that everything is for the public good. So all of our data is available to you to share within your own organizations, and we can talk a bit more about that later on. The DEL dashboard is kind of our bread and butter. So this is our tri-monthly KPI where we track public engagement and behaviors as it relates to international development in those 4 countries that I mentioned. So we have an in-brief series, which is deep dives into specific topics like messengers, climate change, donations. And then we have also reports and larger studies, which again, you can find on our website. So to start, I'm going to hand it over to Paolo, and he's going to take you through the dashboard, which, as I mentioned, is how we track every 3 or 4 months engagement and behaviors in those foreign countries. And we have data on Wales specifically, so we're going to show you the Welsh data compared with Great Britain and also other countries.
Cool. Thank you, and hello, good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here. We're having a blast so far. Starstruck, Lady Phil. Cool. As Molly was saying, we track public engagement using a set of attitudinal and behavioral engagement that gives a sense of how people are understanding the issues the charities and the NGOs in the sector of aid, sustainable development, and the connected topics work on. This is a special dashboard because it allows us to tell us a little bit more about Wales, but as Molly was saying, we're open to conversation. We are happy to splice the data and get into a conversation with you to really understand the need of your organization. Cool. This is our first big question and one of our most important trackers. It's data from 2022, which is our larger sample, but we track more often, and there's going to be an update in 4 to 5 months to this. And it's our question about support for aid. The way we ask it is by telling people, this is the amount that the UK government currently spends. Do you think it should be increased? It should be decreased? Or would you like to keep it the same? And then we bring the people that wanted to keep it at the current level or increase it, and we call those the aid supporters. Okay, so on average in the UK, about 1 in 2 support development aid. That's the 50% figure on the left of the graph. Wales, ever so slightly under. It's not significantly different if you know a little bit of statistical jargon, so it's between and within the error bars. On average, even in Wales, therefore we can say about 1 in 2 will be supportive of aid, ever so slightly below. Support is higher for younger people. It's higher for people that identify as women, ever so slightly marginally. It's higher for people that are educated and of a higher social background. And as you can imagine, it's stronger on the left of the political spectrum, much lower on the right. So for conservatives, this is particularly important and a crisis for the UK because people on the right of the political spectrum are just not there. It's 37% of people that support aid according to this data. And in more recent tracking figures, that's even lower. It's closer to the 30%, so 1 in 3, which is a big challenge, especially as the FCDO has recently announced it intends to rebuild public support for development aid. Those are the people they'll have to target. It's a tough battle. We wish them luck, and we'll try to help them with our data. Cool. This is if you want to have a broader historical sense of how aid support has changed in time compared to other countries. The UK is the dark purple line. As you can see, something really switched around 2021, and that's the times in which the aid cuts were enacted. And we have a sense that really what's changed there is not, it's a combination of factors, of course. Some people will be happier with the lower level, but what we really understand has changed is the fact that campaigning and presence in the media and the debate being had has changed the people's mind, and that's what brought people on board. But as you can see, it's relatively radical, because we were polling for about 44% being in support of aid, and that switched up to 53%. Are we resettling into the 50% point? It looks like it's dropping again. But again, it's still higher than the long-term average. So this is our way of telling you that if you campaign on these issues, if you want to make the case for sustainable development, people are movable. They do care about this issue. The argument can be made, and it can be made effectively. Cool. Together with aid, we also track a series of actions that people take to get involved with issues of sustainable development. We ask people if they've taken any of these actions in the last 12 months. As you can see, Wales is broadly comparable to the UK as a whole. And in general, the behaviours that they take more often have got to do with news. So they read about it, they discuss it, they sometimes share it. And then there is a bit on the very right of the plot, you will see there's a lot of purchasing goods, boycotting goods. And this is mostly charity shops, probably. And then there is donations. Especially with this kind of engagement, so purchasing goods and donating, it looks like Wales is slightly more engaged. So there's a sense that there is higher level of generosity, perhaps. But broadly speaking, the UK and Wales, broadly comparable. This, if you want to have a zoom in a little bit about donations, and you will see that compared to a lot of the regions around the UK, Wales is on the higher end of the generosity scale, especially if you compare it to the Midlands or the Northeast and Yorkshire, really. But yeah, the average for the UK as a whole, it's 17% have donated to a global poverty charity in the last 12 months, and it's 19 in Wales, ever so slightly higher. And here it's the older people that have a higher capacity to donate. This is, of course, a consequence of higher incomes. Women are much more generous than men, and more educated people of a higher social background are more generous. And again, there's that big political chasm between the 13% of donors in the conservative audiences compared to up of 24 for Plaid Cymru, Labour and the Lib Dem supporters. And again, a little bit of historical, but this we can go through it. As you can see, really, donations unsurprisingly follow some sort of like seasonal pattern. They're higher in the winter following Christmas. People are more likely to engage with this kind of behaviors there. I think what's relevant is the right bit of the graph, and you will see that especially in the UK, there is peaks around 23% in. I got a graph laser actually. Around 2022, that's Ukraine. So when campaigns for the humanitarian response in the conflict and the war in Ukraine started, the UK responded exceedingly generously, and that's what we observed in our tracking as well. What surprised us, and I'm sure Molly will remember this, is we were expecting that the combination of the extra generosity to tackle the challenges in Ukraine and the cost of living would have put a big squeeze. And yeah, and to an extent you will see a kind of drop to 17 right after, and we thought, that's it, donations are going to be in crisis for a while, but it recovered. And 23%, which is what we observed in January 23, is by far one of the highest historical dates. So there are concerns that the higher attention people are giving to Ukraine and the cost of living crisis is putting a squeeze on donations, we don't really observe that. People are still donating generously, at least in the UK. And as you can see, the UK is still higher in terms of donation compared to France, Germany, and the United States. This is a final little bit. It's a bit of a salad, but we ask a lot of questions to understand how people sit attitudinally when it comes to issues of sustainable development, cosmopolitanism, global solidarity. And you will see across all of the indicators, there's a sense that Welsh respondents are ever so slightly more engaged. They are more pessimistic, which is one we need to tackle, definitely, as a sector. 83% think, all things considered, in the UK, things are getting worse. They're not getting better. They're not staying the same. It's 88 in Wales, which is ever so slightly higher. But they feel a higher level of interconnectedness. More people agree that what happens in world of development in developing countries affects people in Wales too. They're more concerned. So 55 instead of 53% say they are concerned or very concerned about the levels of poverty in poor countries. They think they can personally make a difference. That's still pretty low in general. That's one of our findings. People do not think they can personally tackle global poverty. But you see, next to it, they also think, more than 1 in 2 think the NGOs can make a real difference about this. And this is especially true in Wales and the rest of the UK. One that puzzled me, I have no particular expertise on this, but I looked at it with interest. It looked like there was a slightly lower level of trust in NGOs in Wales. This is not significant, but it's definitely a challenge. And we know that trust in NGOs is in decline in the UK in general, and Wales is probably following through. So it's a challenge for the sector and the NGOs that move in this space. One final bit, and this is very recent research. What is the connection between attitudes and behaviors is the kind of question that sometimes we get asked a lot. We model this doing something which is basically akin to statistical acrobatics. The bottom line, which I can distill for you, is that there are links between attitudes and behaviors as much as there are links between behaviors and attitudes. So it's the first bit of insight which is really important. If you're changing minds because you're hoping that changing mind will change behaviors, keep in mind that sometimes the simpler thing to do might be to put a foot in the door, get people to donate, and that will change their minds, which will get into a virtuous spiral and convince them to get engaged. The factors that we saw were good at predicting a lot of the donations, informations, getting involved with more political actions kind of behaviors are 3. Concern. So people that are more concerned are more likely to get behaviorally engaged. A sense of guilt. So the people that tell us, I would feel guilty if I didn't take action to tackle issues related to global poverty, then those are people that are more likely to take action. And guilt is a difficult one, as you can imagine, because you're pushing on a negative button, and that might have longer-term consequences on the way your supporters interact with your organization. And one that comes back is trust in international NGOs. This is both, again, a cause and a consequence that the actions take. So if you manage to get into that virtuous cycle, then it kind of will feed itself, but it's tough to kind of get into that. What is interesting is that this match between the attitudes and the action is stronger for people that are more engaged. So the more you take actions and the more you are attitudinally engaged with this, the more these 2 elements feed each other. But for people that are less engaged, so people that are on the margin of engagement, these relationships are more complicated and sometimes less stable. And that's our challenge, right? So sometimes changing minds will work very well to kind of bring people on board, but not as well when people are trying to consider whether they need to buy in on this. Again, the bottom line, though, is if you're campaigning to change minds, keep in mind you're also changing behaviors. If you're campaigning to change behaviors, keep in mind you're also changing minds. Good. Clicker, come back. Molly will now take you through a set of insights that we commissioned a while ago on how people relate to small NGOs and in the importance of local partnerships, which we thought would be relevant to you as an audience in general. But yeah, we'll take a few questions at the end, but I hope this was interesting for you.
I wonder, Paolo, actually, we didn't talk about this, but while it's fresh in people's minds, should we take a couple of questions now? If anyone has anything about the behavioral and engagement indicators, anything burning? Yes, please.
As I visited several African countries, one thing I've noticed is that the local people in these countries have lost trust in the big NGOs in the country. And they say, you know, they've been here for years, they drive around in their big vehicles, they've got big new air-conditioned buildings, and what's changed? And yet little organisations come in and they make a big difference. So it's at our partner end as well, where there's the lack of trust, and therefore I think it impacts on this country because of the amount of donations, etc. But it's not just here, it's in the partner countries as well.
Definitely. Who can blame them as well? Just that apparent disparity.
And on the running free time, Save the Children's got a huge brand new gleaming white building with a sign outside, Save the Children. And I think that's the sort of thing that people are looking at and thinking, where's our money going?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What an excellent example. I mean, we don't have anything specifically about that scenario. But you'll see in the partnership stuff that we're about to show you that what we found, at least, is emphasizing the local partner, putting the local partner on the pedestal, making sure that they're the face of it. That's I think, the best that we know at this point, right?
It's a win-win. It's a win-win for both sides of the audience part. So not just in the net donor part of the country, but also in the net recipient part of the country. Everybody is happier working with smaller organization. They're more trustworthy. They're seen as more effective. So if you can emphasize that kind of relationship with both audiences, that's a win.
Now you're spoiling my present.
Yeah.
Excellent. Another question? Yeah, sure. Oh, over here. Yep.
I have the microphone. Can I ask about the size of the Welsh sample?
Yeah.
You have figures for the Lib Dems, for instance, which poll very low in Wales currently. So you must have an enormous sample.
So the large sample that we use to do this kind of analysis is about 8,000 people per year in the whole of the UK. Of those, about 600 to 700 are in Wales. So the Lib Dem figure refers to the UK as a whole, and all the figures that you saw there. The only comparison that we do is regionally. So we haven't commissioned cuts within the region, if that makes sense. That we cannot do.
And can I just quickly ask about that?
Yeah.
The first slide, which showed Plaid Cymru. Not that one. I think it was the one about support for UK aid.
Yeah.
It strikes me as being very low for Plaid. I wonder, is that because you asked a question about UK development aid rather than development aid in general?
It definitely could be, and it struck me as being anomalous by looking at the other one. I thought Cymru would be on the higher side of the Conservatives, nearby there. It's also true that, again, because it's a nationally representative sample, the percentage of people that tell us support Plaid is small. Right. So it's kind of accumulating to kinds of little bias. And again, it's for reference only. But in terms of nationally representative samples of the UK as a whole, if we look at Cymru, that's the level of support.
Satisfying noise.
Sorry, one quick question. I guess looking at your data, it's people's opinions on a personal level. Looking at it, do you have any data that supports people's opinions when it's put in a corporate setting, like people's decision making as form of a business? Because as you know, people may not be able to contribute on a personal level, but maybe as part of a wider corporate structure, they're able to. Whether they have different opinions in a business setting rather than in an individual setting, if they've got a budget in work that they can dedicate to a foundation. Do you have any data around that?
We ask questions around prosperity, definitely, and the national interest, which I think would get at that a bit. But in terms of in terms of a person's individual prosperity, sort of their own work or their own kind of, is that what you mean?
I guess it's more of a case of. Depending on where you are on the social economic spectrum, you may not have that much to contribute. But if you work for a larger organisation where, if they have a foundation like, as an example, Pret a Manger, for example, have a foundation that they contribute to projects in Africa or wherever they contribute. But if you have an individual working for that organisation, maybe they have that ability financially to say, I would love to support something in this structure because of the fact I have the budget.
Yeah. So we haven't directly looked at that question because most of the work that we do is on public support, intended almost in a political sense. But it's deeply interesting. I wonder if Gates or a large organization might know something about it.
Yeah, to the extent an individual is enmeshed in a company or something and then has views as part of as an
directly through that channel.
I think that's a fascinating question.
We'd be happy to ask around because the larger foundations will probably know more about this. And with the larger donors and those kind of dynamics. But no, we don't engage with it because mostly we inform campaigning in the stalls in the streets kind of sense.
We'll have a think though. Thank you for that. That's great. Shall we push on? It's all right. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about small NGOs and also local partnerships. So this is both the way that small and large NGOs partner with local organizations as well. So if you're not part of a small NGO, this still will apply to you. So in terms of effectiveness and efficiency, small and large NGOs are about the same. People see them as both effective and efficient at about the same level. A significant proportion you can see there of the GB public don't have views on the effectiveness or efficiency of large and small NGOs, and you can kind of see that as an opportunity because there are other aspects of small NGOs that can be emphasized to increase support for them. So more effective and efficient organizations are better, but size is obviously not a determining factor there. Now, when you talk about trustworthiness and honesty, there is a significant difference. The data show a clear and significant relationship between size and trustworthiness and honesty. Large organizations are seen as less trustworthy, and small organizations are seen as more honest, which you might have been able to predict. Similar to effectiveness and efficiency, about 4 in 10 British respondents say they don't know on trustworthiness and honesty. So again, an opportunity to talk about this, because it clearly, once you ask people about it, once you get them thinking about it, it does make a difference in terms of support. In terms of, from that, I mean, it's obvious that there are small differences between large and small NGOs, but these are driven by trust and honesty judgments. So just to emphasize that again. So in terms of developing partnerships with the local community, it's seen as important by the public. So 44% think it's important for large NGOs to partner with local organizations to deliver programs. And while that might seem small, if you look at the breakdown, where there is opinion on partnership, it leans very favorably. 11% of the British public don't think it's important, so that's quite small to see that. However, more than 2 in 10 say that it's neither important or unimportant, and a further 2 in 10 say they don't know. So you see that spread across, but that largest proportion there do think it's important for large NGOs to partner with local organizations to deliver programs. So from a communications perspective, we see it as a win, basically, to emphasize those local partnerships whenever possible. This seems a bit intuitive, but we asked whether funding NGOs who work in poor countries helps build capacity and self-sufficiency in local communities from the point of view of the public. Do the public agree with that statement? And yeah, largely they do. 44% think funding NGOs that work in poor countries helps build that capacity and self-sufficiency in communities. And we've seen self-sufficiency as not an anomaly, a feature across all of our segments that's popular as a concept in international development. So nearly a quarter of the public say they don't know, which again suggests there is an opportunity for communicating that community-based capacity, building work with the public. So 24% don't have a strong view, and we interpret that as meaning they're open to be influenced. Right, so UK public are more likely to pick smaller NGOs and charities for donations or petitions. So they have a 5% increased likelihood. So when we ask respondents to choose between 2 random appeals, 5% more likely to pick a small NGO or charity compared to that large one. Respondents also prefer organizations that are headquartered in the UK. So this data, I should say, it's 2020, I think, right? 2021. Originally. So I think we will repeat this experiment again to understand how that's changing. I would expect that to be going up, actually. That they aren't as favorable toward organizations headquartered in the UK. That's my own little hypothesis, but we'll see. And then we observe a similar effect for appeals asking to sign petitions. Here, too, the small NGOs and charities are 5% more likely to be picked. The large NGOs and charities with a similar preference, again, for organizations that are headquartered in the UK. So from that, it's clear the British public thinks small NGOs are more efficient, effective, honest, and trustworthy. We see the largest, as we said, that's driven largely by honesty and trustworthiness. So emphasizing those features in an organization can serve you well in communications. Developing partnerships with the local community is important, as is capacity building and self-sufficiency generated by local partnerships. Again, strongly driven by engagement levels, but even among the marginally engaged, which, as Paolo said, is kind of the key segment that we want to go after. We really want to shift hearts and minds in that segment. More than 4 in 10 support local partnerships. Small NGOs and charities enjoy a boost for donations and petitions, but respondents do still prefer UK-based organizations. And WASH, just a fun bonus fact, WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene is the predominant issue for eliciting support. Am I going too fast? I had many Welsh cakes, so I feel like I'm sort of... Let's stop there. Again, any questions? So far, I know that was a lot. Still not quite getting at your question, I think, of that sort of local perspective, but it's something I think we should be digging into, for sure.
Can I ask, we've seen a loss, a hemorrhaging of staff of UK NGOs in my experience. Okay. we've seen UK NGOs cutting staff in Wales. It'd be really interesting to know if there's any data on perceptions of people in Wales on NGOs headquartered in Wales or with offices in Wales. Have you done anything like that? Is there anything from Scotland that you might have?
That's a really, really good question. Based on this, if we're extrapolating the findings from this, that people prefer to see organizations headquartered in the UK, it would stand to reason that from local communities, local regions would prefer the same thing in their own regions. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, it's worth cutting. We can get to a similar insight because this should be large enough to, but it's a cop out, but we'll get to your details and get back to you on that one because I would like to look at the tables and give you a more concrete answer than I guess it should apply. And if there's a question about this as more recent events in terms of the cut of personnel and everything, it's a question we'd be happy to look into. In a few months we can do so.
This is one of the problems with our data is that it's really the tip of the iceberg, and as soon as we get to the questions portion, people have excellent questions that if we dig into the tables, we can answer or we can ask in the next round. So yes, please do stay with us and we'll find out for you. Any other questions? Yes.
Apologies if I missed this already in between, but on terms of overall financial, I appreciate that's really hard, individual donors and collect. But can you get a sense of whether overall, we've talked about the likelihood of donating, but can you get a sense of whether the amount of donations and how that's fluctuated in the past, particularly in the past couple of years?
Yeah, we can. We don't have it in the slides, but my laptop is just there. So as soon as I'm done here, I'll do that. That's how quick I can be. We have a sense, if my memory is not betraying me, that although the number of people might have decreased in terms of donations, except for the Ukraine shock, the people that kept donating donated more. So there was some sort of adaptation, and fewer people donate, but the people that donated more. That was definitely the case with a lot of humanitarian appeals. But it would be interesting to kind of ask the tables that question and actually give you a complete answer about how the amount shifted quantitatively. If it helps, the people that are very engaged, which are the ones that we know are very strong, donated more, for sure. So generosity kind of changes bit by bit, but the people at the margin might have donated a little bit less frequently, but more, which is interesting per se.
That's great. Should I check on Slido? Are we okay for time?
No questions.
Excellent, great. That's good news for us right now. Because we still have quite a bit to get through. I should say as well that we're going to make all of these slides available to you through HEAD. So we'll send this, and obviously the one that I'm about to present. We had this interesting idea for the second workshop to let people choose the second topic. We decided to choose this one for the sake of the people online, so we chose climate change. But we also have a deck on gender, and I'm forgetting the last one. Images and messengers for the other one. So if you're at all interested in those, you can also peek into the second workshop this afternoon. But for now, we're going to talk about climate change. So who will face the worst effects of climate change from the point of view of the public, and who should take action to tackle it? So you already saw from Paolo's presentation, climate change and the environment is a top 3 issue in the UK public. It's static, it stays that way through various waves. But since October 2022, this data is from January 2023, fewer respondents said they personally care about economic crises, climate change, and war, but increasingly care about migration and refugees, probably due to the news. Concern for migration and refugees grew by 4% to 30%, which is significant. Economic crises remains the issue the British public still cares most about, even though percentage of people who care is down significantly. Climate change falls to the 3rd spot in the rankings, down significantly again by 4% to 40%, again offset by economic crises. And war is now the 4th ranked issue people care about, down 4% significantly to 34%, the normalizing of the Ukraine war, I would expect. There were no significant changes to all other issues when compared to October. That gives you a sense of where climate change sits, but also that it's kind of a mainstay in that top 3. So in terms of concern for climate change, how has it changed over time? We're currently at 40% say they're concerned about climate change, environment, biodiversity, and pollution in the UK. I know that's kind of a catch-all, but we can talk more specifically about those issues. Our data show that women and university degree students or holders are more likely than men to say that they're most concerned about climate change. Labour, Lib Dems, SNP, and Green Party supporters are more likely to be concerned compared to Conservatives. And you can see there that we have some Wales data. It mostly tracks with the rest of GB. Slightly higher at the peaks, which is interesting. We can talk a bit more about those events. So what do people feel are going to be the key issues that affect them in climate change? Food, flooding, loss of biodiversity are the areas people expect to be most impacted. And this was really interesting for us. So 66% think food and water shortages will be the top impact of climate change. So as a result, obviously, in Wales, we would expect flooding would have topped the list. And it's obviously up there for the rest of GB for top 2. The more tectonic societal consequences of climate change, namely migration, economics, conflicts, and health, are not the top of people's minds. So people aren't yet connecting those things to climate change, which, obviously everyone in this room understands that they're connected, but the public have not yet made those connections. Welsh respondents are more concerned about the impact of flooding, obviously 5% more than the rest, and less about migration. So how, in general, do people feel about climate change? What's the emotional profile of the public when it comes to climate change? So it's anxiety, hopelessness, anger, and being overwhelmed are the public's main feelings. But note then that the dark blue and purple at the bottom is bigger than the gold at the top. Oh, I have this, yes. So people reject the positive emotions more than they embrace the negative emotions. Interestingly, these emotional feelings are consistent across all age groups. The 55-plus age are more hopeful. The 27% than the younger generations, 18 to 24, which are at 15. Welsh respondents are significantly more likely to feel anxious and overwhelmed. UK respondents think future generations will face more harm from climate change, big surprise. So 57% think future generations will face a great deal of harm from climate change. So it was no harm at all, very little harm, moderate harm, a great deal of harm, and don't know in the question. So respondents who identify as women and supporters of Labour, Lib Dems, or the SNP and the Green Party, compared to Conservatives, are more likely to think that future generations will face more harm. Older people are also more likely to think that the harm faced by future generations will be higher than those they personally face in their lifetimes. Here as well, Welsh respondents are just not significantly different from the rest of GB. So 54% say the UK government should do more to reduce the negative effects of climate change. So there is that kind of capital for action existent with the public. So this is followed by 23% of the public who say that people in the UK should do more. And lastly, I should do more. So people are not seeing a whole lot of personal responsibility there. The UK public place greater responsibility of taking action on government and others and tend not to place that on themselves. No significant differences between the Welsh and other respondents there. So this was really interesting for us. Nearly half the British public say it is urgent that the UK government take action. So there's a really great opportunity here for solidarity in terms of communications. 49% think it's very or extremely urgent. There is partisanship on this issue. Don't come across that as often these days. 35% of Conservative voters versus 63% of Labour say it is very extremely urgent. And here too, Welsh respondents not significantly different from the rest of GB. So what kind of policies are they interested in? What would you talk about in terms of policies for climate change? So it's renewable energy sources seem to have the highest support among the British public. That's at 74%. Support power companies to produce more energy from renewable resources. Support is strong among both Conservatives and Labour. That's 72 and 83 respectively. Among the younger group as well, 25 to 34, there's greater support for introducing minimum standard rules for energy efficient homes and promoting decentralized energy distribution systems powered by renewable energy. And again, not significantly different in Wales. And this is useful to you mostly because if you're talking about sort of local policies and they're effective, there is something to be said for how you're talking about them overseas. So generally, there's this impression among the public that climate change is a very serious issue, but also that it's happening somewhere else to someone else. Perceived impact grows with that distance, right? So less impact on the person, the individual, your family, your country, greater impact on other countries and future generations. Just 18% of respondents say climate change will impact them a great deal, compared to 66% who say it will impact future generations. So this is really as we say, kind of kicking the can down the road. The younger generations feel greater impact on themselves personally compared to the older generations. So when we're talking about climate change, how do we encourage the public to make those connections, right? So across all treatment groups, we see that the perceived harm or impact increases with distance, as we said. That is, climate change has a greater harm on those who are further away spatially and temporally. However, as you move along the story, as we say, the more connected, the greater perceived harm, especially for you personally, the more likely you are to sort of create a kind of solidarity with the rest of the world in terms of the impacts of climate change. So the more we close that distance between climate change and the lived experience of the public, the more likely respondents are to see an impact on their lives. So it's not just an empathy question, it's reminding them and sort of awakening them to reality that climate change is affecting them now, it will affect them more in the future. So, key insights, connecting the story absolutely works, right? So talking to the public about the impacts of climate change elsewhere are effective if you're also talking about it near home, or if you're talking about how those impacts elsewhere will reach them in their own homes. So bringing the impact to the home or household, again, increases the sense of harm or jeopardy. For family, for people in the UK and people in other countries, the story that follows through all the way, it works to increase that perceived impact. So it's this question of sort of, we saw the success stories around biodiversity and preserving the environment where people felt like they were all in it together, really. We saw so much success around those campaigns because people felt like it was their lives, their environment being impacted. We need to do the same thing with climate change, collective ownership, basically. So that's it. Yeah, that's it. I was as surprised as you are that it ended right there. Thank you. Can we ask any questions or... That was a whole lot. Again, we'll make the slides available to you. Oh, thank you. Yes, please.
So you're saying to narrow that gap between climate crisis and that personal connection. So are you thinking give people personal stories of people you know or things in their own community, or like say there's flooding in the local town, to bring in local examples? Do you think that would have more impact than talking about UK or worldwide?
So a part of that is that, and there is multiple evidence that especially with people that are not deeply engaged with issues, you have to kind of meet them on their own front yard and realize it. And that's dangerous to an extent because we always end up talking about ourselves, and that communication can kind of shut us off from the real question of building a cosmopolitan sense of solidarity. But it works. So it's a separate example, but working for the Disasters Emergency Committee, one of the most successful assets in the campaign when the earthquake struck in Turkey was an appeal that said this would be the size of the earthquake if it struck the UK. It would hit almost all the country. And people were very taken aback by it. So that's and of course, as I said, dangerous because it's just creating a sense of I'll act because it could have happened to me and I don't want that to happen to me, and therefore maybe I get the sense that I should take an action to it. But especially with people that are on the fence, neither here nor there, it works. The way we did it here is we gave a story that increases in detail. So some people just get one that says, you will have noticed this year there's been a particularly strong heat wave. We feel that this at the autumn, so it was just after the summer in which there was fires and floodings and all sorts of climate negative events. And then some people get a second version of the story that also tells them, you know, this is connected to global food insecurity, and that's why the price of a lot of the food that we're consuming is increasing. And then there's a third version of the story in which we say, your food prices have increased as a consequence of it. And that's why you will pay more for it coming months. So that's what we mean by saying you really spell out the consequences of something that might feel remote to them. And that increases the sense that they are personally impacted by it. So the two lessons in a sense is, yes, people still feel that the impact is neither here nor is it coming. Younger people will face it. It's not for me. I'm mostly here in a time in which things are not so negative. But if you show them the connection, they will understand it to a higher and stronger extent.
So if you're talking to older people who, as you say, less connected, you can talk about their children or their grandchildren,
Yes,
but
exactly.
still keep it local to
Yeah.
where their grandchildren are living now, and what is some specific thing that might affect their grandchildren in the future.
You don't have to make them feel responsible in order to create those feelings. It doesn't have to be you did this is a product of your lifetime. It's very much, again, we're all in this together. It just so happens that your grandkids are going to be the ones that face the brunt.
But really spelling it out. And I think that's a challenge for us. And we have to remember we live in a bit of a bubble. We're all sensible, connected, well-informed practitioners of the field out there. That kind of conversation needs to be had. But I think it's one of the all this time del adagios. The fact that the conversation can be had is good. It's fine. It just needs to be had. You can't just hope that people will understand you if you don't spell it out. And so you have to show up and take the microphone and be like, this is what it means. This is what climate change is. You can't keep ignoring it forever. And this is why it matters to you and it matters to everybody else.
Usefully, it seems like in the US, at least, we've moved beyond the kind of blame aspect of it, because it used to come up in conversations more regularly. And now it has moved on somewhat to that adaptation mitigation question of what should we do to get ready.
Sorry, one more question then. So I noticed your figures that more than 50% think the government should do more, which is really, from my point of view, encouraging. But what I find in my work I'm doing on campaigning on climate crisis, that a lot of people say, we know it's a problem, we're very worried, but they think that taking individual action or local group action is the answer. And when you say, well, actually, the government has to be responsible, because whatever you do locally on your own is just a drop in the ocean. It needs the government to take action. So how can you get people from thinking it's their own responsibility to thinking actually it's government, what they can do to actually put pressure on the government? How can you move them on that way?
That's fascinating. We're undoing basically decades of, I would say, kind of not brainwashing, but extractive companies basically making us feel like it's our individual recycle, do this, like this is, it's on you to make a difference. And we know now, obviously, that it's a handful of companies, and not necessarily individuals. So it's a bit of undoing that work and understanding that the agency lies with the government. And the best way to do that, we've found, is success stories. So telling stories where the government has passed legislation or rules or sort of restrictions or things like this that have encouraged progress, right? So you have an example of how they're responsible, and then people start to sort of embed that in their minds that this is the responsible party.
It's me again. In the 17 years since I've been travelling back and forth to Africa, mostly to West Africa, I've seen for myself the impact of this, because the wet seasons, the rainy seasons are starting earlier, they're finishing later, and the rains are getting heavier. So it's not, something that's developed pre that. I mean, it really is visible. And in fact, in Sierra Leone, when I was in 2013, coming back from one of the rural areas, and we came over a mountain where they were building a road. It's the mountain that 4 years ago, the massive landslide took place that flooded part of Freetown and killed a lot of people. So I've seen it firsthand, but the way I sell it is, when I'm speaking to people in this country, that if we try and help to stabilise these countries, people would be less likely to want to leave. And so why would you leave a stable country, cross the Sahara, cross the Mediterranean and try and get here if everything was all right at home? So it's in everybody's interest, and people are concerned about immigration. And I think by helping to stabilise our partner countries, in whichever way that is, it's a win-win. And it's indisputable, really. But when you see it firsthand, it really is it's quite frightening to see the impact on the poorest on the planet, really.
Devastating, absolutely. That's the stemming the flow argument, which is used often in the U.S. And it's a tricky one to use as well, because it suggests necessarily that there's something that can be immediately done rather than this progressive thing that's happening. But I think in what you're describing, basically explaining the danger that people face, often, and we see, again, I keep bringing up the US, but in the US there's this perception that people aren't that bad, aren't that horribly off. And so giving sort of real-life examples of how difficult it is, nobody would move from their home and risk their lives on this journey unless they were being forced to, if their family wasn't at risk, for example. So I think hitting home that story and also dissipating this myth that they just want, like a cooler job or something. It's a struggle.
To add 2 bits to that, just to put more context into it, and one of them is really a caveat. We know, and it's one of our most consistent findings, that argument based on national interest do not change support for aid. So yes, there are reasons why we should help developing countries, because it will create a system in which migration is safer, or its volumes might be reduced if that's a policy objective. But as far as the UK audience goes, that's just not appreciated. So if it's an argument that is made amongst policymakers, amongst decision makers. It might matter for people that decide how to allocate the resources, but as far as public support goes, people are convinced it's the right thing to do, and we should help those who are most in need. That's where it's at, which is the second bit, and it's the complicated bit, and it's insights perhaps that come more from France than they do the UK, but it's more and more evident that people understand that climate change has a higher impact on poor countries. They have understood the lesson, but more and more we are convinced that the fact is they understand that to be a higher impact because they're worse off. So it's a problem that is putting extra strain on them. So they don't understand, and the audience at large in donor countries do not understand, that it's worse because it is climatically worse. So the impact that is having on those regions is worse because the climate is more disrupted. There are higher chances of natural disasters. There's famine. There's actually these things. And people haven't drawn that connection at all. So they think of it as a place where things are already particularly bad, and now there is also climate change. And that's why they think they're more impacted by it, but not because they understand the scale of that. And again, it's anecdotal evidence, but when Disasters Emergency Committee ran the appeal for Pakistan, 2/3 of the country was under the water of the floods, and people just did not understand that. They looked at the assets for the campaign and they said, well, the rivers have come out of the margins, but yeah, that happens in Yorkshire. What do you want me to say about that? It's that complicated bit that needs to be explained, in which the disruption of the breakdown of climate is worse in countries that are not our own. And that has not come through. So the only lesson that people have learned is these people are not doing particularly well, and now they have to face these issues as well.
It's a problem of representation as well, as people have a really stereotypical backwards idea of what these communities are like and the infrastructure that exists and the capacity that exists. Yeah. So it's also correcting that misinterpretation. Any other questions? Been a wonderful audience. Excellent questions. Please, if there's a question, from Slido.
Sorry, I don't think there's anything from Slido, but I do have a question. So you can see that support there is quite high for people think that the UK government should do more. Is there any data on other regional governments in the UK, so the Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish governments? I don't know if there's been any data being commissioned on maybe more specific policies that people think, for instance, that like privatization of energy companies or water companies, whether people think that sort of thing might be better for promoting renewable energy production.
To your first question about regional governments, no, we don't have anything that looks specifically of support or for regional governments taking action like Wales. But as part of the question that the gentleman had over here, I think, sorry, national government, sorry, excuse me. First time in Wales, learning so much. Thank you. There's nothing that we have here that's specifically about that, but I think as the bit of data we might pull up for the gentleman or think about later on, that's another question we can ask as part of that batch for sure. In terms of policy, so this is part of what we have. So for those who can't, it's too small in the back, require power companies to produce more energy from renewable sources, introduce minimum standard rules for energy efficient homes, improved early warning systems to disasters, improve mass transit and provide low-cost public transportation, set strict carbon dioxide emission limits, promote decentralized energy distribution systems powered by renewable energy. So this is not exhaustive of the questions we have asked about policy. We did another survey around COP26 where we ask quite a few policy questions, so I can get those to you as well.
I think the insight, though, again, is there's so much appetite for government action. You will see that all of this gain majority support. So people just want the government to do something. I'm being as honest and as down to earth as possible. They are priorities. They would like to see more renewable energy, and they think there is a lot that they can personally do about it. But people are ready. We're all like literally on our tenterhooks, and as soon as if the situation aligns in the right direction, somebody takes power that is actually willing to take action on this, the public will back it. There will be no question whatsoever about the fact that we need to do more about this. That's the insight. So there will be no resistance.
Yeah, consistently in the top 3 for most people. Yeah. This issue is it's one to vote on for sure. You all have been wonderful. Such wonderful questions. Please come up to us and ask if we have specific data. We really might. There's so much. So yeah, thank you all very much.